thank you all for coming to spend part of your day with us this morning.
Welcome to George Washington University.
There are two parts to the U.S. Congress. The first one is the House of Representatives. On the other side is the U.S. Senate.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Why America 2020 Toward a More Perfect Union. My name is Jeannie Allen, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Center for Education Reform. And it's my distinct pleasure to have so many fantastic educators and leaders from our schools across the country with us today. And given the unique situation that we're all making the best of out there today, this year's programs are designed not only for charter educators in the district, but all across the country, thanks to a generous grant from the Diana Davis Spencer Foundation. The programs this year virtually are designed to help teachers work with their students to understand the context we're living in, particularly when it comes to our First Amendment and peaceful assembly, the right to peacefully assemble. So let me just jump in and start with the context. Now, Anita, you are on the board of the White House Historical Association. Anita, you're right there adjacent to Lafayette Park when you're on the board, when you're at the White House Historical Association. And as you've talked about, it's been the site of other protests post-revolution, but it's closed today, and it's not supposed to be that way. So let's start with you. Can you elaborate on what it is and what's happening there today that might be really helpful for our educators as they take their students through what peaceful assembly is all about?
Sure. Well, thank you, Jeannie, and for the opportunity to talk about this space that's, the closest space that anyone, any American or anyone can get to the White House, to the president, where he can, or she can someday hear their voices. I mean, really, for more than a century, Lafayette Park, or the President's Park, as it's known, has really been the site for people to exercise their First Amendment rights. And to this day, that space is where people can argue their point of view, fight for LGBTQ rights, fight for civil rights, fight against the Vietnam War. Lafayette Park has been the site for all of these major discussions for advocacy, for policy, but also for complaints.
Lita, let me go on to Lawrence. Talk about what we're seeing there in Washington. I mean, we've had some conversations about obviously the challenges that we face in this country. And, a lot of the protests have centered on statues and what they represent. How does that play out today, in your opinion, particularly for Black and Brown people?
Just some initial thoughts. Being here, in Washington, D.C., you see, people of color, Black and Brown and Indigenous people of color, challenging the status quo. For 200 years, many of these figures we've revered as founding fathers, have been lionized, they've been held up as heroes. And we are seeing, people of color challenging that status quo. And, we're now seeing for the first time a major shift in the perception we have of the founders. Jefferson's undergone, a major reevaluation of his standing in American history. You see, Jackson now kind of becoming, undergoing that same reevaluation.
But the last statue you put there was Andrew Jackson.
Yeah.
And there's debate going on right now, obviously. One of the reasons I think some of you have mentioned the park has been closed is because there were attempts to pull down the statue. Mm-hmm. So is that the right thing? Like how do we put that in context for our friends?
Well, I would say that what we're seeing is a reevaluation of American history. And we are challenging the perception that the founders are these completely heroic figures to be lionized. Where historians and educators all across the country are, taking a serious reevaluation as to, both the good and bad of the founders, recognizing that these men are in fact mortal men, that they are complex figures who did both good and bad things. And it's important to acknowledge that complexity. I think that is a valuable discussion to have. I think as an educator, it's important to have developmentally appropriate conversations with your students about, history, and recognizing that, history is messy, it is complicated, that there are some unfortunate things that have happened in our past that are part of our national character. Having developmentally appropriate but honest conversations with students about that, is critical to developing a better understanding of a full historical context of, our history.
So talk about the itself, because I think that's one of the most fascinating things. Why is it there? So you said it's within, it's within earshot of the president.
Sure.
So valuable.
Sure. Well, I think let's start with this. And our nation's first president, who never lived at the White House, of course, we know that because our early capital city was in New York and then later in Philadelphia until the White House was built. But the design of the White House, the area surrounding the White House, these were the vision of President Washington or General Washington to be the federal city. What would the design of the federal city be? It's where the people could have access to their leaders, right? We have just thrown off this being run by a monarchy or being under control of a monarchy where the public doesn't have access to the king, but the public would have access to their elected leader here. And so this space is very sacred for that purpose. And in the corners, the four corners of Lafayette Park. We already talked about Andrew Jackson's statue there, of course, and I agree, of course, with Lawrence. These are all of the heroes of the Revolution. All of our heroes, historical figures, are flawed. Andrew Jackson was a flawed character. But I want people to know about who stands in the four corners of Lafayette Park. These are four statues honoring our Revolutionary War heroes, our foreign Revolutionary War heroes, foreign citizens who came to the aid of this new country, America, when she needed them most. And one of them, one of the most significant ones, of course, of the Marquis de Lafayette, one of General Washington's aide-de-camp, that became like a son to him and had an enormous influence in our revolution, came from France. Another statue to a leader, the Count of Rochambeau, which is in the other corner opposite the Marquis de Lafayette. Also, he had a significant influence in the Battle of Yorktown, one of the battles that really turned the tide in the American Revolution. These were gifts to the American people, also with contributions from the people of France, and that French leaders attended the dedications of these statues. The other two that are there are of General von Steuben, who Friedrich von Steuben, a Prussian general, really helped to train our scrappy little, Revolutionary War soldiers who were citizens who volunteered to fight. And so his helping to train our soldiers clearly was incredibly valuable. One of the lesser known figures that's in that park is Thaddeus Kosciuszko, who was a Polish general. Also, why is he less known? He's less known because he was not leading a battle like Yorktown, although he was involved in the Battle of Saratoga, but he was an engineer. And really what he did was help to develop all of those forts, design the forts that housed our military, but also housed our the precious weaponry that we had all along the Hudson Valley, from Canada to New York City, which the British, of course, wanted to invade and take over. Those battles of that area, anyone who travels them can see how incredibly important they were to turning the tide in the revolution. So he was not as well known because he was an engineer, not so much a soldier. But one thing that's really important about him to know, that's lost in the context of the protests, the violent protests that are going on or did go on at Lafayette Park before it was closed, the desecration of a lot of these statues. Kosciuszko, more than any of them, when he died, he left whatever assets that were given to him, money that he was given by citizens of our country, land that he was given in Ohio as a gift for his fight in the American Revolution. He left all of his assets to Thomas Jefferson for a specific purpose, to free his slaves and to educate. He was buying their freedom. Wow. He was very critical of the American revolutionary, our founding fathers who had slaves, including Washington, and felt their freedom should be secure. The sad thing is when Kosciuszko went back to Poland, he died in 1816. Thomas Jefferson never lived up to the spirit of Kosciuszko's will.
Wow.
It was fought all the way to the Supreme Court here in the United States. But that's a statue of someone who is being desecrated now. And my point is, let's understand the full context of who these people are, flawed or not. That's a piece of history that I'm sure was not under consideration when his statue was spray painted.
History is a constant process. We're constantly learning new facts about our history. And things that we were aware of, say, 15, 20 years ago, those notions are challenged. And things that we're just now learning new things about, the founders themselves. So it's an ongoing process, and we have to be open to that, to understand, accept that we are constantly learning new facts, new ideas, new perspectives. And, as an educator, you have to be flexible. You have to be willing to, learn along with your students that, our preconceived notions, are being challenged, and you have to be willing to accept that change. That, as Anita said, these are men, they are flawed. They made mistakes. They made some decisions, and bad decisions. And, we have to, be willing to have an honest conversation about that. And as long as we're open to new ideas and new scholarship and new methods of learning, I think that's fair to have those conversations.